And it certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about that. Thank you very much for being here.
Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, good morning, Gio. This is one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of the Middle East.
Also this morning, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announcing that his country's forces have seized a buffer zone in the Golan Heights established by a 1974 ceasefire agreement with Syria after Syrian troops abandoned their positions. Israel captured the Golan Heights in the 1967 Mideast War and annexed it. And now the international community, except for the United States, views as occupied Syrian territory.
You could, on the other hand, have rebel leaders who say, you know, I see the trend in the Middle East. It's going to be peace in the Middle East. It's not Iran. We don't like Iran. We see that the future of the Middle East is Arab-Israeli peace agreements. So you could have it the other extreme. I mean, I was with Henry Kissinger, Rachel, when he did the first 1973 disengagement agreements after the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. And Syria was always the hardest nut to crack. You know, Jordan, you could figure out Jordan, you could figure out Egypt, you could figure out the Saudis, you could figure out Israel. But Syria was always the hardest nut to crack because it's not one group. It's not one ethnic group in Syria. It's many ethnic groups. It's many tribes. And Bashar al-Assad's father was Hafez al-Assad. He was head of it then. But now you have nobody in charge. Now, that's a country that's been governed by one family for, 60 years? Not clear what happens next.
Breaking news on Syria, and this time related to Israel, and Israeli airstrikes being reported by Reuters, saying that Israel has targeted customs headquarters and military intelligence in a security complex in the Kafr Sousa district of Damascus.
President-elect Donald Trump reacting, saying that Syria is, quote, not our fight. The president-elect also calling on Russia to take this as a sign to end their war in Ukraine.
In fact, just today, U.S. forces conducted a dozen of precision strikes, airstrikes, within Syria, targeting camps and operatives.
Celebrations in Damascus as crowds topple a statue after a coalition of Islamist rebel groups called HTS sweep across Syria, taking control of the troubled country.
Taking control of major cities, a lightning shift in a long-simmering civil war. In the city of Homs, a statue of former Syrian President Hafez al-Assad was toppled by a cheering crowd. Rebel leaders said the city had been fully liberated. This is a historic moment that will distinguish between right and wrong, said the rebel leader Abu Muhammad al-Golani in a recorded video.
HTS was founded by Islamist rebel Abu Muhammad al-Golani. It emerged from a group known as Al-Nusra Front that he set up in 2011 in the early stages of Syria's war. Back then, under Golani's leadership, they were a direct affiliate of Al-Qaeda, but reportedly broke ranks with the group in 2017.
But make no mistake, this is truly an historic time in the Middle East. I don't think we've seen such an important moment in many years.
It certainly is, and we do expect a ripple effect of impacts throughout the region and around the world. With everybody watching right now, we're looking at some of these images of former President Bashar al-Assad of Syria right now on TV. We're getting reporting from Russian state media that he's now being held in Moscow.
This becomes a mini version of the global game. Turkey, Iran, to some extent, depending on their capabilities, Russia still, and the United States. Excuse me. You mentioned Trump has said, let's stay out. He put out a statement saying, let this play out. We're going to stay out. But as Rachel and you have both said, well, we've got 900 troops already there. We've been in this game. So it seems to me that we have a choice. We either remove those 900 troops, because you pointed out they're sitting ducks, they're targets to some extent now, or we have to double down. We have to go in more or pull out. I don't know how maintaining the course is a realistic, look, we all hope for a great outcome and minimal U.S. investment. I'm just not sure that hope is a realistic hope.
So who are these anti-government forces in Syria, and what do they want? Rebel groups in Syria are various and diverse, but this lightning offensive was spearheaded by a group called HTS. It's made up of jihad fighters and is designated a organization by the UN, the US, Turkey, and other countries. Now, Assad was supported by minorities in Syria, like the Christians, the Alawite Muslims, and Druze. You touched upon this earlier, but what can these groups expect now?
And also, I'm concerned about the Christian minority. These are ancient Christian groups. Some people say they were better, or at least somewhat protected under Assad, and that now they'll be exposed. But then I've seen contradictory things.
It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks.
Yes, this was very much Biden taking credit for a shifting Middle East. Really remarkable. He said there have been a dozen airstrikes, U.S. airstrikes in Syria against targets. And I thought it was notable because he talked about we were able to get here because we supported Israel, not mentioning at all any of the massive criticism facing this U.S. president for the in Gaza. But, excuse me, but what he is saying is that here's what we're going to do going forward. That doesn't really ring all that true because he's going to be out of office in just over a month's time. So he's talking about sending people to the region, probably Bill Burns, the CIA director, but we don't know that yet. He was not very specific on that. But saying that we're going to provide aid to the neighboring countries, aid to the Syrian people, that's not his call. That's going to be up to U.S. Incoming President Donald Trump, who has said the U.S. should have nothing to do with this. He went in his first term and tried to pull the U.S. troops out of Syria, ended up leaving about 400. There are about 900 now. So anything that Biden has just promised the region, the people of Syria, taking this victory lap, if you will, is really not going to come to anything because he's leaving office.
We also know that President-elect Trump has been watching all of these developments very closely, and he posted earlier about Syria being a mess. He pointed out, he said, Syria is not our friend. The United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. That was a quote from President Trump on social media, but he also suggested that perhaps this could be an opening for a ceasefire conversation between Russia and Ukraine. So the implications there being that clearly whatever's happened in Syria is not just an issue for that country, but one for the entire region. And it's something we're going to continue to follow here on ABC News.
There's also reports of Israel bombing the main research center in the Syrian capital. This report says that was long suspected of being used by Iran to develop long-range guided missiles. That, of course, Iran, a close ally of President Bashar al-Assad.
Are we going to see tanks rolling into Syria from other countries? What are you looking for over the next week in terms of countries outside forces trying to help stabilize things?
Well, there already are Israeli operations going on along that border area right now in order to protect Israel. And like I said, it's public information now that Israel's worked with around a dozen rebel groups in order to help protect itself in that part of the area. So I don't foresee anyone besides maybe the Turks really getting involved there militarily. There's already some fighting between some of the rebel groups, and Turkey and its proxies are going to probably want to move very quickly to attack the Syrian Democratic Forces that are allied with the United States.
What, in your view, should the U.S. do about Syria?
Well, I think we do have our national security at stake there. Look, the most sizable portion of that Syrian opposition is made up of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And we have to be concerned about in Syria, as well as Syria's chemical weapons stockpile. So a mix of and a chemical weapons stockpile is, of course, of grave concern to us and our allies in the region. We also have to be concerned about spillover into Jordan and Israel, and also the potential that more fighting will ensue, that this is just the beginning of a follow-on civil war.
And this was something that President Trump was right about in his first term. The United States, because of our own energy, newly discovered and new technologies, we now have enough oil and natural gas to power the entire world for hundreds of years, cheaper, safer, cleaner than any other country, any other region of the world. So the Middle East has been embroiled forever, going back to the days of Jesus, if not before, by just warfare between tribes. But what made it important to the rest of the world was the oil. And now that oil is far less important. Syria doesn't have any oil, but everybody else in the region does. But now that the United States can replace the Middle East, replace Russia as the world's energy hub, as we have not only energy independence, but energy dominance, that part of the world becomes a very different place. If they don't figure out, those countries don't figure out some new game, some new way of having a strong economy, they're toast. And that was the genesis of President Trump's Abraham Accords. So maybe this group, if they can figure out who's in charge of this group, maybe they can find a way to peace.
I mean, we've become accustomed to the President of the United States abroad falling asleep in front of African dignitaries or wandering off into the Amazon rainforest. So, clearly Trump passed that bar with his appearance yesterday. But it is more than that. As you note, Zelensky is now talking about a potential peace deal.
But Jill Biden was there. Look at this picture of them sitting next to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, she looks starry-eyed. I really do believe she voted for him. Look at that.
It was.
I mean, that's true love.
Interesting
She's
dynamic.
interested.
That's the look you give when you meet the guy you just voted for?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
The whole room, it was really, the power dynamics in that room were pretty amazing. There was not a set of eyes in the room that was not on Donald Trump the entire time.
Right.
Yes.